Back for Act 2.
Act 2, here we
Act
go.
2. So we talked a little bit about defining risk, and now we're going to talk a little bit about measuring risk and how we're maybe not really wired to be able to do that very well.
Yeah, but particularly because we've got the challenge of doing it real time.
Right.
You know, this isn't a planned event where, you know, we've got time to do this whole analysis and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this is all happening right now.
Yeah.
And as humans, you know, we are not equipped with probability severity detectors.
Right.
We just do not have that hardware. And that's why, like, really good gamblers, they learn all the math, they learn the odds, they learn all of that stuff.
Because on average, we can't tell when we go from 1 in 100,000 to the odds being 1 in, say, 200.
No. And, you know, and that's actually what makes gambling exciting, but it's also what gives the house the total advantage.
There's a lot of money in it.
Yeah. The U.S., just the U.S. gambling industry is $150 billion a year.
That's crazy.
Yeah, well, because they know we don't have that hardware real time to detect those odds and understand that.
So I think a good topic to talk about for this part is when we're at a fire, law enforcement assignment, probably a military operation. You know, you're a backcountry skiing guide doing helicopter skiing, taking people in avalanche terrain, whatever it is. You can all of a sudden have that moment where you realize that, oh man, I'm in deep.
Oh.
And you're trying to figure out like how you get that stress reaction
the bolt of
panic
the
sets
adrenaline
in.
And cortisol and your neuropeptide Y, and I mean it's just this chemical dump, and you're like, oh my God.
And you're trying to figure out how you got there. But a lot of times the way we got there had less to do with the physical environment and more to do with group dynamics, heuristics, and stuff like that, because those are what makes it difficult for us to really perceive what's going on.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll tell you an example that just because I was so complicit in it, that really stands out. And we were doing some parachute jumps in Colorado at the Eagle County Airport. So Eagle County, you think Eagle County, that's like the Vail ski resort and all that. So the airport itself is about 6,500 feet. And we were actually jumping from 3,000 feet higher. High out, that 6,500 foot is a pretty high altitude drop zone, and so there's a bunch of stuff to know about successfully jumping and operating at that. And so we were actually jumping at roughly 10,000 feet above sea level, 3,000 feet above the ground. And this was just practice proficiency jumping. You know, we didn't have any equipment, wasn't nighttime, you know, nothing. None of that kind of stuff. And so we're just going up in a helicopter. It's a UH-1H or like a Bell 212, a Huey helicopter. And we had a couple people, 2 people on the left side, 2 people on the right side go up. So total of 4 jumpers, you know, come up, do a little racetrack. Everybody jumps out. And we'd already done 2 jumps today, you know, and everything was going great. In fact, we had a little X that we made out of some of our little panels. And, you know, we're betting beers on who's going to land the closest, you know, that kind of whole thing. And we had this opportunity for a 3rd jump. And it was about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And so I'm like, yeah, I'll go. And one other guy went. So now there's 2 of us, one on each side of the helicopter. So we take off, and we go around on our racetrack, maybe 8 minutes or so. And, you know, on an Army helicopter, we usually sit hanging out, with legs hanging out the doors.
Right.
The doors are open.
Sitting sideways.
Legs are hanging out, sitting sideways. So the aircraft is going this way. This is what I'm doing, right? And, you know, I can look and see and stuff like that. Well, pretty soon I realized, without even knowing that it actually was happening, just all of a sudden I realized I'm like this. We're going in this direction, and I'm just a little bit off of facing forward.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so the helicopter is like doing this, and I'm like, okay, this is not good. What's going on here? We're really crabbing, you know, into the wind really hard. And so, and as I look out, I see this thundercloud that wasn't there when we took off. And it is it's the mountains. You've seen these like kind of roiling, moving mountain storms, right? That's what it was. And it's pretty far down. I mean, like the cloud, we're 3,000 feet off the ground. The cloud is like straight out, right? So it's dark and nasty and I'm like, oh, that's bad. And the downdrafts and the winds and this and that. And I said, okay, well, we're done. This will be a scrub, So we had a jump master, one of my buddies, and so the jump master doesn't jump in this aircraft, just puts the other people out and lands. And I'm like, yeah, we're done. This is a no-go, right? And pretty soon...
Yeah, but you weren't new at this point either. So you knew enough to know that this was probably going to not be a thing.
Yeah, like I'm a non-commissioned officer. I'm probably a sergeant first class at this point in time in E7. I'm an experienced jump master myself. And that's how I look at this, and it's like, not even a thing, right? But my buddy starts giving jump commands. Get ready, check equipment, these kinds of things. Eventually, it's like 30 seconds, sit in the door, where you kind of like scooch up, and I'm like, there's no way this is going to happen, right? And then he's like, go! And I'm like, how'd I go? And at first it's a little like pin the tail on the donkey. You got to get control of your parachute, and is it open? Does it look good? Where am I? You twist it up, get all that out. Okay, so now I'm in control of the parachute. Now this is a round parachute, and it has a static line that's attached to the helicopter. So it's not like free fall. It's static line, and there's some holes in the back of the parachute, and so you pull the toggles. It closes this hole, you turn this way, you turn this way. And because of those holes, it has some forward speed. So it will go like 9 miles an hour forward speed, which is good because you can mitigate some of the wind. If you have a wind coming your way, you can turn into it and you're actually dropping or a little bit slower on that vertical element, which is, how you get hurt. And again, it's high altitude, so less air, you're going to hit harder and all that stuff. So we had control of this, and I'm like, okay, it's all good, and I look at the airport, I see where our spot has been, and it's like, okay, I think I can maneuver around and land there. And like 2 seconds later, I'm like, that's not even an option. That's gone. That option is gone. And that's how fast I was moving. I mean, it was there, it was normal, and then it wasn't, just like that. And that's kind of when I was like, uh-oh. So I start looking around. Now I'm turning into the wind because it's so strong. I'm going to at least take 9 miles an hour off of it. But man, I am flying. I can see the ground under me, and it's like, where am I going? Now I'm having to looking back. The next thing I see is this little canyon, like a little, not a Grand Canyon, but it's like steep and rocky, and it's going to hurt.
Not a landing zone.
Not a landing zone. So I'm like, oh my gosh, so I actually have to run with the wind at my back in order to go a different direction and avoid that. So I get that done, and I'm like, oh, okay, thank God. Go back into the wind. Now, where am I going to land? And it's like, okay, I think I'll land. Gone. Okay, well, in that case, I'll, this is like how fast my options are just disappearing, right? And so finally, I'm like, okay, what? And then I start seeing this, like, what is that? And it's these power lines. And I don't mean like a little country road power line. This is like power across the Rockies, primary transmission lines to Denver big, right? And I'm like, holy cow. And I realized, because by now I can sort of judge my, glide slope, if you will. And I realized, like, these power lines are like this. I'm gonna run into them, because they're wide, And instantly, I'm like, I have to run with the wind to try to overshoot those power lines and go above them. So I go back, go like this, and I don't know how close I got to those lines. They looked big to me. And I was tingling all over my body, and that sound, just this.
Oh my goodness.
And I'm just like, holy cow. So we get over that, back into the wind, and I'm like, now where am I going to land? And I'm looking, and now I see, oh my God, I'm going to land in a junkyard in the middle of the mountains,
After all the other things, now we got...
It's this scrap metal place, right? And I'm like, oh my God, and I'm going to hit the ground. My parachute's going to drag me like just the second I hit. And so I'm like, okay, there's kind of an open spot. You're doing this. And normally you would land like this to do your little parachute landing fall, and I landed like this. I had my hand on the canopy release assembly, cut away my canopy so I wouldn't get drugged. I land, and it's kind of, there's no roll. It's like a bump, 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 toom, and it was all good, right? It was all good. And, I'm like, do the finger check, the toe check,
Right.
yeah, okay, it's all right. That wasn't bad, right?
Yeah.
And meanwhile, the guys, because I had landed a mile and a half. I should have landed like right more or less at them. I was a
Right.
mile and a half away from the airport. And these guys were like, I could see the van trying to figure out how to get to where I was,
Right.
and they're like, dude, are you are, and, and I think about the air chains that were involved in this. I mean, because
Right.
it's only luck. It's pure luck that
Right.
I was okay and not really hurt.
Accidentally
not dead.
successful.
Accidentally successful, right? And, so there was my error chain about what I did and why I did it. But there were all these other error chains, and I'm thinking about, like, what caused me to do that? And, you think about what leaders, we get sucked into tunnel vision, we get target fixation,
Right.
This sort of this victory focus. I mean, this was the third jump. It was going to be easy, third
Right.
rodeo of the day. These bias, confirmation bias, hearing what we want to hear,
Yep.
anchoring bias, good money after bad, or good efforts after bad efforts. All these things that cause these issues, for leaders.
Yeah, and I think when you look at those things like tunnel vision, target fixation, they're all, again, issues between people. They're not issues of like the physical
Yeah, well,
things
and
in
this
the
is
incident.
this is just individuals.
Right.
So yes, it matters about what other people are bringing to this, but this is what we bring.
Right.
To
Every
the
time.
incident, every single time, and now I combine this with yours.
Right.
I combine all this stuff that it's already preloaded,
Yep.
in my rucksack
Right.
as I show up to the incident. So it's part of what I have to manage and
Right.
navigate through. It's part of the incident, is what I'm bringing, showing up with.
Right.
So that there was my error change, because why did I go? Well, we're all prisoners of our own culture, right? So when that jump master tells you to go, you go back to being a private. You go. That's what you do.
Right.
And that all was rooted in here. And then so there was that error chain, because I could see what was coming. I saw it.
Yeah.
Even though it was a slow awareness, like 5 seconds or so, to understand what this meant, I knew what it meant. I told myself, this is a no-go.
Yeah. And then when they said go.
I went anyway.
Yeah.
And so it's like, so I brought that error chain, influenced first and foremost by my own decision traps, stress reactions, biases.
Right.
And then now combine that one error chain, because we do, we think of like linear, these events as like just a line of dominoes.
Right.
Error
Single
chain,
line, easy
this
to
little
follow.
decision,
Yeah.
that thing happened, this decision, that to happen. But now combine that. What caused the jump master to say go?
Right.
He could see everything I could see.
Yeah.
What the pilots were flying this way.
They're flying sideways. So
It's
that's
not their
normal
first
leading.
rodeo,
Right.
and where was that? And we have a drop zone support officer. We have somebody that's in that role of that safety officer on the ground, or the winds, or this, is that, is it safe, go, no go. What happened there, right? So
Right.
now that's 4, or if you want to say 2 pilots, that's 5, error chains going on.
Right. But so sometimes I think the better way to look at it is, it's almost like your mountain thunderstorm. It's this cloud of errors, and it's
Fog
like a
of war.
thunderstorm. It builds and it builds, and all of a sudden it gets to the point where everything lines up, and bam, there's a lightning strike. But
Well, often we try to implement a technological solution to deal with that complexity.
right,
And
correct.
we've had people working, all our smart brains working on penetrating that fog of war, that friction, danger, uncertainty with
Right.
some technological solution, and that's great.
Right.
The challenge is that it creates more vulnerabilities. When you add more technology, or more policies, more of whatever. You're just
Right.
creating more stuff to manage, and there's more little bits that can go wrong. And so you're creating these vulnerabilities that you didn't even know you were creating when you started.
Right. Good example might be for fire might be PPE.
Mm-hmm.
The improvements in turnout gear has saved a lot of lives, but sometimes it can get us into trouble. And the reason why is because we start to be too reliant on it. We're taking turnout gear and we're going into modern fire behavior, modern structures. We know it's hotter and faster, but we're using old tactics. Like we know when we feel really hot that
Mm-hmm.
we'll be in a situation that we need to start controlling the environment or backing out. But the trouble is the gear is performing to the level that by the time we feel that, we're probably in a situation where now that gear has to perform 100% and can't fail.
Cannot.
So we've
fail.
kind of pushed ourselves, and instead of using some other techniques that maybe we've learned in the past, we've not relied on navigating in a fire or really understanding what's going on. We just waited till we felt warm, and that's not working anymore.
Yeah.
Because we added that extra layer.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be like here today, COVID-19, if the internet went out.
Yeah.
When everybody's working from home,
Right.
all these kids are going to school online, and yet we know there's giant cybersecurity threats. We've got this whole cybersecurity
Right.
people like getting no sleep at night.
Right.
And we are completely reliant on this thing. What's the backup to the internet?
Right, there isn't one.
And so
But there was, like you have said before.
But there's this transition, right? With all technology, we
Right.
move from old school to new school. And so for me, when I grew up, it was pre-GPS. So we're in the military. We spent huge amounts of our time, our energy, our training on map reading, compass, land navigation, pace counts, understanding constellations. If you can't see the North Star, all that kind of thing. And then GPS came out. Awesome.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But make sure you've got your stubby pencil if you have to go back to the
To
old
the map.
way.
Yeah.
And then GPS progressed to the point where we now can't fight a war without it.
Right.
And we struggle with kids knowing how to read maps and compasses and even the basic fundamentals. They can't really do that. And so we've moved past that, even though that whole GPS system is vulnerable.
Right.
The threats to the global positioning system caused the Naval Academy, the U.S. Naval Academy, to reinstitute celestial navigation into their curriculum.
Right. Which had been gone for probably,
I don't know, at least 10 years.
Yeah.
Was gone, because who's ever going to...
you're not going to pull a sextant
Who's going
out
to use
my-
that, right?
Right.
Except, guess what?
Yeah.
We're vulnerable enough, and you've seen that with these Navy ships that have collided in recent years. And going back, it's all this stuff that we talked about. It's basic watch standing techniques and that communication, because the technology was doing it all for us.
Right.
So
So maybe the better way to look at it isn't trying to measure it. It's because we're probably going to use a subjective system that's not very accurate anyway. Maybe the better way to look at it is just understanding that risk is present and coming up with a system to be able to kind of weather those buffets and still move forward to the mission, which is becoming more resilient, which is what we'll talk about in Act 3.
Act 3.
Act 3.